There's quite a large age difference between me and my little sister Mia. When I was in high school, she was only 3 years old. My parents both worked long shifts at the local hospital, so every day when I got out of school around 3 p.m., it was my responsibility to pick her up from daycare and take her home. I would then just need to watch her for over a few hours before my parents would get home at around dinner time. I didn't mind the extra responsibility. After all, I knew my parents worked hard to provide for our family, and Mia wasn't difficult to take care of. The daycare that Mia went to Monday through Friday was run by a sweet older couple inside of their house. They were probably around 10 other kids that went there regularly, all under the age of 4. Every day when I would pick up Mia, the older couple would give me an update to pass on to my parents about how she did that day, what kids she played with, and any special projects or artwork she worked on. It was clear they really cared about the kids and were passionate about their job. One average day, I arrived at the daycare at around 3:15 p.m. and walked inside to greet Mia. She was playing with a dollhouse with a few other little girls when I arrived. As soon as she saw me, she jumped up and raced to hug me. The older woman who owned the daycare got off a nearby rocking chair and came over to greet me, a big smile on her face. She told me that Mia had a great day and behaved very well as usual. She then handed me Mia's backpack and folder containing some pictures that she had drawn that day. I thanked her and told her to have a good day. I then led Mia out to my car and helped her into her car seat that was always strapped into the back seat of my car. I then hopped into the driver's seat and began heading in the direction of home. Like most days, I asked Mia how her day went and what she did at daycare. She told me that she had a good day and played with her best friend, Jake. I couldn't remember which one of the kids Jake was, but carried on the conversation as if I did, and asked her what things she and Jake did together. She said they swung on the swings, had a snack, and jumped on the trampoline together. I nodded along, only paying half attention to her. I had a lot of homework to get to that evening and needed to get home as fast as possible. After pulling into our driveway, I helped Mia out of her car seat and into the house. She was hungry, so I prepared a snack for her and turned on a cartoon to hopefully keep her occupied until my parents got home, allowing me time to get things done. My parents both got home just in time for dinner. As my mom was taking off her coat, she asked me if I had heard how Mia had done at daycare that day. I told her there were no problems and that she had a great day playing with her friend Jake. My mom stopped what she was doing and looked at me with a confused expression on her face. She told me there wasn't any kids at the daycare named Jake. I shrugged it off and told her that maybe he was new or she got his name wrong. Several days went by and there was no mention of Jake. That was until one day I happened to look at one of the drawings Mia was working on after school. She was sitting at the dining room table and had been focused on her drawing for nearly an hour without saying a word. She was usually pretty talkative, so this seemed a little strange to me. Mia was a very talented artist for her age, so I was expecting her drawing to be good. It was very good, but that wasn't what surprised me about it. It was a very strange drawing that instantly caught my eye. There was a girl with red hair, whom I assumed was supposed to be Mia, standing nearby what appeared to be a pool. There was also a little boy with blonde hair in the pool. He didn't appear to be swimming, but rather floating face down along the surface of the pool. She had drawn black X's over his eyes. Mia? Who are the people you drew there? I asked her. That's me and my friend Jake, she told me, without looking up from her drawing. What is he doing in the pool? I asked her. There was a brief moment of silence before she looked at me right in the eyes and said, "He's dead." I was shocked and literally gasped aloud. I told her it wasn't very nice to be drawing her friends dead, and that it could hurt Jake's feelings if he saw this. I encouraged her to draw something happy like a rainbow or a puppy, but she didn't say anything more and just went back to drawing. I had no idea how Mia had gotten the idea to draw someone dead. My parents definitely didn't allow her to watch any scary movies or have access to scary books. Maybe someone at the daycare had put this thought into her head. I felt really creeped out and disturbed. She was 3 and shouldn't be thinking these things. My parents texted me that they were both going to be home a little late and asked if I could start dinner for myself and Mia. I told them I could. I told Mia to go upstairs and clean up her room while I began cooking, and she did as she was told. I grabbed a big pot and began heating up some chili on the stove. It was an easy dish to complete, and I was finished in about 30 minutes. I poured a serving for Mia and set it on the table. I then called for her to come down and eat. She didn't come down, so I called her a second time. When she still didn't come down, I sighed and began walking upstairs to get her. I was surprised to hear her talking to someone as I approached her room. I figured she was just playing make-believe with her dolls. But as I got closer, I could hear her talking to someone named Jake. My first thought was that maybe Jake wasn't a kid from daycare. He could just be an imaginary friend. But to my amazement, it was as if she was carrying a full-on conversation. She would ask a question and then pause and wait for a response. The conversation was detailed. It was about things she had done that day, and it sounded as if she and the invisible person had done things together. My heart nearly stopped when she said, "Why can't I talk to my family about you anymore? Is it because only I can see you?" Finally, I worked up the nerve to peek into the room. The door was open just a crack, but it was wide enough to get a good look inside. Inside of Mia's room, there was a circular play swing that hung from 2 ropes attached to bolts on the ceiling. The seat was made out of a web of ropes. To my horror, I watched as the swing moved back and forth in the air while Mia sat on the opposite side of the room. There was something pushing the swing. In a panic, I raced into the room and snatched Mia off the ground. I ran as fast as I could downstairs and sat her on the couch. I demanded to know who she was talking to and what she was doing. My fear must have been evident because she began to break down and cry. She then began to tell me everything. She explained that around when she first started going to the daycare, she began seeing a little boy named Jake. She said he would appear at the daycare and sometimes in her room. She said he was very nice, but asked her not to tell anyone about him. She also said she was the only one who could see him. I was terrified and at this point felt totally convinced that my little sister was being haunted by a ghost boy. When my parents got home, a short while later, I told them everything that had happened and I showed them the disturbing picture Mia had drawn. I'm not sure that they were convinced she was actually being haunted, but they were definitely concerned. They told me they would speak to the owners of the daycare and find out if Mia was exhibiting any of this weird behavior at school. But the next morning, my parents were running late and they didn't have a chance to speak with the daycare workers when they dropped Mia off. I didn't want to put the conversation off any further, so I approached the older couple when I picked Mia up that day. I told her I knew it was going to sound weird, but that Mia claims to be talking to someone no one else can see but her, and I wanted to know if she was acting strange at daycare at all. I expected the couple to think I was crazy, but instead, they both looked like they had seen a ghost. The older woman cleared her throat and asked if Mia had said the name of the little boy she was talking to. I said she had told me the name of the boy was Jake. I watched as both of their faces went white and the woman burst into tears immediately. I was completely confused by their reaction. After the older man collected himself, he explained that he and his wife had a son who died 20 years ago after he fell into the family pool when no one was around and drowned. I was shocked, terrified, but also sad. I was now convinced that the boy who was speaking with my sister was the ghost of the couple's son, who had clearly not yet moved on to the next life. After explaining the situation to my parents, they thought the best thing to do was to have the house blessed by a priest. After that happened, Mia didn't report seeing Jake anymore. Years have passed, and this story still haunts me. I hope that Jake finally made his way to the next life. When I was in high school and my younger brother Mark was about 4 years old, my mom had a third child, a baby girl named Ava. I was incredibly excited when she was born. After all, I hadn't expected my mom to have any more children, and I always hoped for a little sister as long as I could remember. Even though I was delighted by Ava's birth, Mark was not as excited. In fact, he seemed completely resentful of her. It seemed like he didn't like the fact that she was taking my parents' attention away from him, or maybe he just didn't like the change that had occurred in our family. For all of his life, we had just been a family of 4, and then we became a family of 5 overnight. It all started when my parents first told us that they were going to have a new baby in the family. I'm sure they expected it to be a nice, heartwarming experience. They called us downstairs one day and there was a great big gift box sitting on the kitchen table with a bow on it. They told us it was for both of us, so we were of course super excited. My mom was recording when they told us to lift up the lid. When we did so, we saw an ultrasound picture inside. I knew what it was right away and began yelling with excitement, but being as young as he was, Mark was confused. After my parents explained to him that it was a picture of his new baby sister, he angrily knocked the box off the table and stomped away. My mom shut off the camera, clearly shocked and disappointed by his reaction. As the months of my mom's pregnancy went by, my parents kept trying to get Mark to get excited about the prospect of having a new sibling. They bought him shirts that had the words Big Brother on them, and they even took him to the store so he could pick out the toys to give the new baby when she was born. Nothing they did worked. My parents couldn't change his negative opinion about the baby. Eventually, they gave up and assured me that as soon as he met the baby in real life, he would definitely fall in love with her and everything would be fine. I definitely wasn't convinced. Finally, after months of waiting, my mom went into labor and she and my dad went to the hospital to have the baby. My grandmother came to stay with Mark and I during that time. The day after my mom gave birth, my grandmother took the two of us to the hospital to see my parents and meet the baby. The whole way, my grandmother and I were chatting excitedly about the baby, but Mark stayed completely silent. I remember walking into the hospital room and seeing my mom sitting in the bed with my dad standing next to her. She was holding baby Ava, who was wrapped in a tiny blanket. I was so excited to meet her and was allowed to hold her first. After both my grandmother and I had had a chance to hold the baby, my parents attempted to get Mark to hold her, but when they tried to place her on his lap, he pushed her away while saying, "No, I hate her." I know this was probably super upsetting for my parents, but they brushed it off. I think still believing that things would get better as time went on. My mom ended up getting released from the hospital and coming home the next day. My dad took off work for a few months to help out with the baby and ensure my mom got enough rest. While I absolutely loved every second with Ava, Mark was still as uninterested as ever. It wasn't just that he seemed not to care about her. He actually hated her. He refused to go into her bedroom and got furious when she cried. He hated every time my parents would give her attention instead of him. Months went by, and eventually both my parents had to return to work in order to stay on top of bills. Most of the time, my grandmother would babysit if they ever needed help, because it was a lot of responsibility being left alone with a 4-year-old and a baby while I was only a teenager. But one time when school was out for the summer, my parents both had to work and my grandmother was unavailable. So I had to watch both Mark and Ava one afternoon. I had just put Ava down for a nap and was cleaning up the living room, which was littered with baby toys and bottles. Mark was playing with Legos quietly in his room. As I was cleaning up, I was watching my favorite show on television and checking my phone to see when my parents were going to get home. I had no reason to think that it would be any sort of problem to leave Mark alone upstairs. My parents did all the time and there were never any issues. About 15 minutes had gone by and all of a sudden I heard Ava crying. I knew immediately by the sound of the cry that something was very wrong. This wasn't the type of cry she would make when she was hungry or wanted to be held. It was a cry like she was in pain. I raced upstairs as fast as I could and saw that the bathroom door was open and the light was on. I could hear running water. I ran inside and to my horror, Ava was lying in the tub while Mark stood over her. I looked at the faucet and saw that the heat was on the highest setting and he was basically burning her. I snatched Ava from the tub and turned the water off. I began screaming at Mark, asking him why he would do that. Didn't he know he was hurting her? I looked at him expecting some sort of remorse, but he was completely unfazed. He just stood there smirking. After a long while of trying to calm Ava down, she finally fell back asleep. I didn't leave her side the entire rest of the time until my parents got home. I told my parents what had happened the second they walked in the door. They were horrified, and they ended up taking him to a child counselor to get treatment. I still wonder what else he would have done to Ava if he had the chance. When I was in high school, it was very common for me to watch my little sister Kendra. She was 5 and we were very close. She liked to do everything I did. On one particular day, we decided to go shopping at Target. As we did at the start of every Target trip, we stopped at the Starbucks they had in the store. I ordered an iced coffee for myself and a cake pop for Kendra. While we were waiting for the items to come out, we stood towards the end of the aisle. I remember noticing a man dressed in all black clothing sitting alone at a table nearby. He didn't have a coffee and wasn't working on a laptop or talking to anybody, so he seemed somewhat out of place. I decided to trust my gut and took a different route out into the rest of the store in order to avoid walking past him. When we started out in the little girl clothing aisle, my mom had given me some money so I could use it to buy Kendra a new outfit for when she went back to school. We found a few things she liked and were about to head to the dressing room to make sure that they fit. I was shocked when I looked through a rack of clothing and noticed the man from Starbucks standing nearby and watching us. The second I made eye contact with him, he turned away. I was creeped out, but didn't want to scare Kendra, so we walked on to the dressing room. The dressing room was co-ed, which meant both men and women could go in. For safety reasons, I went into the dressing room with Kendra. One of the dresses she tried on fit perfectly, so we decided we would buy it. When I opened up the door to the dressing room, I saw the same man sitting at a bench nearby. I told myself that this could just be a coincidence. After all, he could just have a wife or a girlfriend he was waiting for. I was out of some makeup products, so Kendra and I ended up going to the beauty section. She was looking through some face masks while I was trying to decide what brand of mascara I wanted to purchase. Sure enough, the same man from before casually appeared at the end of the aisle. This time, I knew with certainty that he was following us. What could he possibly be doing in this aisle? Yes, I know that some men wear makeup, but he was a great big burly man and he didn't seem like the type. I glanced over at him and saw that he had his phone out and appeared to be taking a picture of us. At this point, I decided it was time to leave. We made our way to the register, the man following a short distance behind us. When I was paying, I leaned over to the girl behind the register and told her that me and my sister were being followed by a man and asked if there was any way an employee could walk us to our car. She nodded and immediately called over a security guard. The guard walked with us all the way to the car. The man must have known the gig was up because I watched him jump into a van and speed away a few minutes after we reached our car. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't asked for help that day. Always trust your gut.